How is it, Mr. Greenaway, that you started your career as a painter and you're now a filmmaker? I was always disappointed that paintings did not have soundtracks. So maybe what I make is not cinema, but paintings with soundtracks. Mm-hmm. You know, there's this curious phenomenon. I don't think painters become painters because they observe life in the street. Painters become painters because they see other painters. Filmmakers become filmmakers because they see other films, not because they particularly want to portray the life in the street. So there's something very sort of reflexive, self-reflexive about this. And I think you can easily see how these ideas affect my cinema. When you watch a Greenaway film, you're only watching a film. You're not doing anything else. It's not a window on the world. It's not a door into the universe. It's a phenomenology which is based on a whole series of conventions, most of them very, very artificial, which cinema has built up for itself. But if you think, you know, the history of cinema is profound, which I doubt, I certainly don't think it's very profound, and you make a comparison with a huge vocabulary of you know, painting endeavor and all its associates, printmaking, etc., there's almost no comparison. All good characters have to enter from the left. All bad characters have to enter from the right. You revere gods by putting them at the top of the stairs. You hate people by putting them in a pit. And so it goes on. And these notions, of course, will come from painting, because painting preceded from thousands of years before anybody ever picked up a camera. All the notions of color coding, you know, which are ancient. I don't think the Chinese regard white in the same way we do. We get married in white, don't we? The Chinese get, you know, go to their funerals in white. So you have to worry again about these little local differences. But it's a vast, vast, vast vocabulary out there, a lot of it unknown. And somehow Eisenstein understood that and wanted to get that sense of energy and diversity into filmmaking. The very best painting is non-narrative. It does not need narrative to give you meaning. And I think one of the greatest things that ever happened to painting, which introduced us to the 20th century, which is really the most extraordinary year, or the most extraordinary century for picture making, will be the 20th century. Because, you know, certainly right up to Monet, I think you can actually find the actual painting, which is Sunrise over Westminster Abbey, which is, I think, about 1861, the first real painting that eschewed the notion of narrative. And before that, very largely all painting was narrative, basically either illustrating the Bible or certainly ancient, antique, classical texts over and over again. And even if you make a portrait, it's somehow an allegory of goodness, of evil, of power, whatever. And even, certainly in Dutch terms, if you make a still life, it's an allegory of bitterness or sweetness, whatever else. So there's always this association, indeed, of the textual world. Do we paint what we see, or do we paint what we know? And I think most painting is about painting what you know, not what you see. That might sound a rather elitist, privatized attitude towards, you know, art school practicing, but I think it's a very interesting sort of phenomenon to consider. I'm sure that the most amazing thing in the whole universe is the human imagination. And I don't think cinema is there simply to reproduce what God has created out there, which is, first of all, an absolute impossibility, so why bother? So I think that the cinema should really be a product of the imagination. So that means it deals with all the other sort of non-narrative, non-realistic aspects. So it deals, I suppose, with metaphor, and with allegory, and with symbolism. I now hope my great ambition is to get rid of narrativity in cinema. But I'm sure you can agree it's an uphill task, because most people believe, I don't know whether it's really true, but they believe they go to the cinema to be told a story. That is not a good idea. That's lousy for literature and incredibly lousy for cinema. It's a bit like when you go to a famous gallery. Let's say you go to the Louvre in Paris, and you can see people looking at a painting and thinking, don't quite understand what's going on, and what's going on, and they bend forward and they read the legend underneath the painting, and it says, "Lady with a red hat." Ah, that's what it is. They immediately forget the painting. I understand it, it's the lady with the red hat, and they move to the next painting. So our actual ability to engage with the business of looking at pictures is very immature, I think. And we always, thanks to the notion of text and literature, we give up very, very quickly because we're much better skilled at handling text and literature than we ever are at the notions of looking, indeed, at the image. I'd often thought that maybe the digital revolution would begin to overturn some of these concerns, but alas, alack, James Bond has just won a huge amount of public attention and loads of money by, again, being basically a piece of illustrated text. Filmmakers never die, they just fade away. I shall keep going until it becomes impossible. But I suppose behind your question, indeed, is this whole association between the notion of what at least 25,000 years of Western European painting and only 1895 to 2015, 120 years of cinema, which is minuscule. So maybe there is a way, indeed, that cinema is still at its deep embryonic stage and we haven't really given it a chance really to develop. I sincerely believe that probably in a melancholy moment, none of us have ever seen any cinema. All we've seen is 120 years of illustrated text, because the relationship to the notion of cinema to the bookshop is very, very strong. Cinema really doesn't have, I suppose, any subject matters of its own. It'll always go back to literature to develop them. It's almost impossible for me, I think, to go to a producer or a film studio with 4 paintings, 3 lithographs, and a book of drawings and say, give me the money. Most people are visually illiterate, and they all need a text. You have never seen a film that did not start life with a text. We could obviously say probably the big events in cinema commercially recently are goddamn Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, and we know these are texts. You can go down to the marketplace and buy the goddamn books. But it's the same with Almodovar, it's the same with Lars von Trier, it's the same with Godard, it's the same with Eisenstein. The way we have constructed, it need not have been like this. We could have had a cinema of painters instead of a cinema of writers. It need not have been like this, but it is. Godard always famously said, okay, we play the game. We play this stupid game. We write a script, make it as readable and as possible, and we take it to a film producer, and we trick the film producer into agreeing to the money. You take the check, you put it in the bank, you wait 3 days till it's really, really there. Then you put the check in your pocket and then throw the script away and go and make a film, because the script is not a film.